Welcome, everybody. I'm Rona Elliott, and I'm here at the Golden Door for a thrilling evening with all of you, and I really mean that, for our Friday night speaker series. As you can see, we have just an extraordinary person here, so thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for inviting me. Thank you very much.
When Kathy and I discussed this, as she said, and we wanted to find people who were extraordinary to bring to the guests here, and people who you may not have heard from because they don't do public speaking, I immediately thought of Verdine, because Verdine has more energy than any human being on the planet Earth. And anyone who's here at the door wants to have some of that energy. So that's really the genesis of your being here. And of course, he is considered by everyone to be not only one of the greatest bass players on the planet Earth, but one of the single greatest bass player who also dances. I don't know if you think of yourself that way,
okay,
but everybody else does.
Okay.
So just for the record, for people who may not understand the distinction between a guitar player, what does a bass player do in a band? We see you, but what is the job?
Well, the job of a bass player, theoretically, in our world, we call it holding the groove down, the pocket down. In other words, it has to feel good. It holds it. The bass player and drummer are really the glue that holds any band together. You know, that you hear on records, that you hear live. It's a marriage, you know, and that's really what a bass player does, you know. And guitar, of course, was a very popular instrument, you know, with Jimi Hendrix and things like that, and I played, and you know, and I was one of the first young bass guitar players that came along in the 70s. And normally the bass player is sort of like in the background, you know, but I kind of changed that around a little bit, you know. By accident and on purpose. And we were talking about my brother Maurice, the gentleman that you saw in the first two clips. He's the reason I became what I became. He's my older brother by 10 years, and a great writer, a great producer. But he was a drummer first, and he played on a lot of hit records back in the day, of Jackie Wilson, Chess Records, Motown record. He was what you call a session drummer. And a session drummer is a drummer that plays on records every day. And he was a very successful commercial drummer, played on a lot of hit records, but he was also a jazz drummer at night. And then what happened, he ended up working with a young man, a gentleman, and you can Google him later, named Ramsey Lewis. And Ramsey Lewis had a great trio in the 60s, and Maurice was his drummer. And Maurice stayed with him. We call Maurice Reese. Reese stayed with him for 5 years. You know, they did some great records, you know, and Reese decided to strike out on his own. But of course, he was working on different things. And at the particular time, I was a kid, you know, and I was in school and classical training and things like that. And I'd play nightclubs. And my late father was a doctor. My late mother was a school teacher. And so it was a very eclectic household. You know, it was music, it was, you know, books. We had a grand piano. So, you know, it was different, and it was the, you know, late 50s, 60s. We had a color television set. We went to the museums, you know, so it was a very eclectic mix. So, and Maurice would come over with we had 45s then, you know, for those that don't know, they were the small records.
They go around and around.
Yeah, they were singles around, you know, and they would make the records on Mondays, and they would be out on Fridays. So Maurice would bring the records. I would listen to all of those records, you know, as a kid. And then I'd listen to jazz records, Miles Davis, Stan Getz. I'd listen to the Beatles records. And what happened was that when Maurice decided to make this group, I was studying classical, you know, I studied with great teachers, Roddy Villar from Chicago Symphony Orchestra, David Beth from the Metropolitan Opera. And then on weekends I'd play joints, you know, like, you know, clubs, you know, 40-20, 40 minutes on, 20 minutes off. And I didn't know that Maurice was checking me out, so he decided to go to California. He left Ramsey April the 15th, tax day, 1970. So, you know, he left Ramsey. My mother was a little upset because she liked Ramsey. You know, Maurice was making like $100,000 then, in 19...
Big.
Then. penthouse apartment in, South Shore, Chicago, hip, and he was a great dresser. He was cool. He was just cool. He was one of the cool cats. And so he said, do you want to come to California? Because I'm putting a group together. Because I had it all planned. I was going to be a classical trained African-American bass player. I was going to make me $50,000 a year, going to give me a nice little house, and maybe one day I'd play on a record. And I'm 18. And so I go to California. I'm 18 years old, pimple-faced kid, buck teeth, skinny, weighed about 100 pounds, and I had $30 in my pocket. And I left June 6, 1970. And it was, and I had never been on an airplane. I went on school trips. I went on a DC on a train when I was a junior, and a milk train, took like a year to get there. And that was my high school thing, right? And then I went to Springfield, Illinois. That's about it, But then I went to California, and I went to California at the height, I call it, of the Great Second American Revolution. Where we had the women's lib movement, we had the civil rights movement, the Vietnam movement, all at the same time when I came to LA. And I saw people there that I saw on television. But Maurice picked me up at the airport, and he said, "Look at those palm trees, man! Look at those palm trees." And and I'm thinking, man, we're gonna do. I'm excited because I'd never been to California. I hadn't ever been anywhere. And I'm thinking, man, we're gonna make music, man. We're gonna take acid. We're gonna do just like the Beatles. We're gonna be like, we're here. So I said, where's my bedroom? He says, right there. It was a couch. And that's where I slept for like about a year. And it was a very interesting experience because my younger brother Fred was also a drummer, and that's who I played with coming up as a kid. He eventually joined the band later on. We had 5-6 years of struggle before people knew. 8 years before the world knew.
So it's 8 years before the world knows.
Before the world knew, the whole world, before those records.
And some of those funny kind of outfits the world was just finding out. So when you look back now, and I'm sure you have those outfits hidden in a closet somewhere, right?
I can still get in a couple of them, yeah.
You can still get in all of them.
I got a couple of them I can get in, yeah.
What do you see in terms of your evolution and your energy and just what's going on there? What can you tell us about what you see? Because we, as members of the audience, are soaking in one experience, but then that was what was actually happening to you. What do you see up there?
You mean the first part?
In those early clips.
The early clips, I see a group that, we were cresting at the time. We back-to-back records. So when those things happen, they're faster. Things are moving fast. And don't forget now, that was not at the beginning of our career. That was sort of like in the period where, we were really getting there. We were really establishing ourselves. But we hadn't fully crossed over to the mainstream. We were getting there. And don't forget now, that was the phase where people might have thought, yeah, they got a couple of hit records, how long they would last. So that, because a career goes in many different phases. You go, the beginning, and then you bust open that you're the cat's meow. Right. Then everybody says, okay, let's see what they do on the next record. Right. Then you have the critics, then you have people that love you, then you have people that might write things against you for a while. So that was that period where we were sort of getting there, and then, and Maurice's growth, because mind you, before he got with Earth and Fire, he never sang. He was just a drummer. And Ramsey Lewis is a great guy, he's a great guy. And when Reese got ready to leave Ramsey, he told Ramsey, man, I'm getting ready to put this group together, man. I'm gonna have a group, man, that fly through the air. I'm gonna have a group to do this. And Reese said, man, take some aspirin and go to bed. And I told Reese later, I said, I'm so glad you didn't take that aspirin. I am so glad you didn't take that aspirin, because he had a idea that was nobody had. And Maurice...
Explain that.
Well, first of all, when you work with geniuses, and Maurice is a genius.
Your older brother.
Yes. I'm talented, but he's a genius, and that's a different thing, because I saw it in action, because don't forget now, he thought it up. He created the group. He named the group. And he performed it and produced it and wrote it. It's a big deal to do that. And he did it before it became popular. And so when he brought me to California, he gave me an opportunity to work with him. I mean, on a day-to-day basis. You know, when he was putting it together, we were cutting demo records. And mind you, those first 10 or 15 hits, him and I played on them together, you know, before he really had to take the producer helm over after our other producer, Charles Stepney, died.
Well, what makes a great performer?
A performer?
Yeah, what makes it great? I mean, people think you are a great performer. We'll get to your style of performance, but you are sitting here talking about your older brother in a magnificent way. And, you know, you're paying tribute to him. And what are your standards that make him great? Since everybody else thinks you're pretty awesome yourself.
Well, first of all, you gotta love the music. You got to be disciplined. You've got to be focused. And don't forget now, this is Maurice's dream. And, you know, he had left, you know, 6 figures in the 70s, which like whatever that would be today. And he really had an idea about what he wanted to do. And fortunately, I was young enough that I could receive it, you know. And don't forget now, he was a good taskmaster too. It wasn't like, you know, I love you so much, man, we're just going to do great things. Oh my God. You know, you had to be on time. You know, he was very serious about his music. You know, and he was no nonsense. And in real life, you know, he was cool. You know, he was like, you know, we talk about music, you know, clothes, sports, cars, you know.
You know, there's such a history of families. We all know what happened to the Jacksons. The Kinks fight each other on stage.
Yeah.
That didn't happen in your family. What was different?
Well, you know, he was 10 years older, you know. You know, a good left hook would get you together too, you know. But, you know, that's And don't forget now, you know, so we had a chance to share a lot of things together. And, you know, when you love somebody and respect them, you know, because he was like, you know, our Elvis, you know, in the band. He was an entity to himself, you know.
But that's why Earth, Wind & Fire is so different. This is just not the story in music of families. We've heard these stories. I mean, poor Frank Sinatra Jr.,
right.
You know. And you're telling me you love your brother and respect him, and it's a family operation.
Yeah, and he taught me a lot about, you know, the music business, you know, by watching him, you know, watching what he went through, and he was at that particular time he was like, you know, we're gonna do this today, we're gonna do this today, we're gonna do this today, because the first record that I ever, now mind you, we were on our 7th, 8th, 9th album, you know, over a period of 7, 8 years, you know, so we grew into that. That didn't happen like overnight, you know. First of all, as wild as the costumes looked, the workmanship was fantastic.
Right.
And it was expensive, you know. I think we spent $250,000 at the time for wardrobe and staging and all that stuff. And so it was a big deal, you know, it was a big deal, you know.
But the music still outshone the costumes.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But we had to do that because what happens was we were the first African-American group to cross over into arenas. You know, we were the first African-American group to play 4 nights at Madison
One
Square.
of the things in the sheets that I hope that you have is you were the first African-American band to ever sell out Madison Square Garden.
4 nights in a row.
Which is just beyond.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time.
At the time, it was a big
It's
deal.
unbelievable.
Yeah. And also, too, being in a band was a big deal for me, a big deal for Reese. And the first record that I did was a movie soundtrack with Maurice. We did a movie because we had a period in African American films called the Black Exploitation. You know, we had a lot of African American films.
People know what blaxploitation movies are. They're really fun to watch.
Yeah,
Do you
they're
want to
fun.
give
They're
it
hokey.
Really?
The budgets are real cheap. You know, it's not like when you see Selma today or you
Right.
see
It's Black
the Help.
Dynamite.
It's Black Experience. It's
Right.
like karaoke except on film.
Right.
And what happened was that it was shot by a director named Melvin Van Peebles, who was a very eclectic guy. His son is Mario Van Peebles, who is a great director and actor today. And he called Maurice about the soundtrack, and we did this soundtrack at Paramount Studios. And Maurice said, "We're gonna do a soundtrack in 2 weeks." And so, in those days, you had when you did a movie. Nowadays, you do it on computer. It's on time code. You know, you stop and start. You stop and start. You stop and start. Then you had to do it on a big screen like this. You have to look at the movie, and there was no sound. You had to put the sound in. And I had never done a movie before, never. So I was nervous. I'm 18. This is my first 2 weeks in LA. We're doing a movie. And so it was at Paramount Pictures. I didn't have a car, so I had to walk to Paramount from Franklin to Melrose and Vine. And you know how you drive on the lot, like television, you look for your name on the lot. Mr. White, I had to walk on the lot so they could find my name. So you're right here, kid, you know what I mean? And I had my bass on my back. And Maurice went earlier because he had the drums, he had to set up, had to set up. And each 5 seconds I started getting nervous because I'm walking down the sound stages, at Paramount 8, 7, and I'm looking at extras, they got Cleopatra outfits on, the extras, they got, whatever, and I'm getting nervous. And I walk in the room and it's tons of musicians in there, just like sitting in here. It dawns on me. I said, I just know I'm gonna fail. And and it's just, I'm nervous, and Maurice is warming up, and all kind of sounds are going. When you're recording with orchestra, there's a lot of sounds going on, and the guy is saying, seat back, take 8, scene 9, you know what I mean? And and Maurice is warming up, and he's warming up, and I had never played with Maurice. I just saw him on stage, and he brought me to California. I had never, ever played with him.
Oh my God.
When he would come by the house, he would watch us rehearse, but he never sat down and played drums with me until that night, and I saw the professional Maurice. When drummers are warming up, they'd really like warming up. Warming up. He was, and I'm looking, I'm warming, he's like, he wasn't Big Brother then, he was like the pro. Right. And he's I'm looking at him, my mouth is open. And he looks at me saying, hey man, don't look at me, look at the screen! And then we did, seriously. And we cut the full soundtrack in about 3 days. And I thought he was going to send me back to Chicago on a Greyhound because I thought I'd failed. I got through it. It was and it was moving fast. So what I learned from Maurice was to stay open, just be ready, because you may never know when the phone might ring or the door might knock. Somebody might want you to do something. So that I learned from him because he was a pro. Before I got there, and before Philip Bailey got there, he was a pro. He had all of music.
So between that time, when was the first breakout hit?
We had little hits, local hits. The big breakout was 70. I was 70. The big records around 74.
And the first one was?
That you all knew was Shining Star.
Right.
That
pretty
was
significant song.
That was on the That's the Way the World album, which was also a soundtrack. For a movie. It was a lousy movie.
But a great soundtrack?
Yeah, the soundtrack was great, yeah.
Let me switch gears here because I need to get to some of this. So when people say your name, they say energy, on stage, they've never, I was at somebody's 50th birthday party and the Earth, Wind & Fire was on stage and I stood in front of the stage I couldn't take my eyes off him. It was literally impossible to look anywhere else for me. Not that the other musicians weren't compelling, but his force of nature was so great. You were on fire. So when that happens to you, where are you?
You mean on the shows?
When you are doing your thing and jumping around and playing like that, are you in your mind? Are you channeling? What's happening?
Well, you're open. I'm a seasoned performer, so you sort of kind of know the terrain. Your peripheral vision is pretty together. You sort of know what's going on. You had asked me when I saw the early ones what we were thinking, right? Okay, that's what we were thinking then. When you saw the Kennedy Center honors,
right.
What you're seeing there are seasoned guys that know exactly what they're doing. We're like, cool. When you saw the three of us, you saw a group that we had done it. We were seasoned, but we were still cool. That's what you're getting. And that takes a long time to get. You don't get that because you want to. So when I'm on stage, you just jump into it.
But the passion and the energy, I would give anything at any time in my entire life, including right this second, to be able to stand up, move that loosely and is it spirit moving through you? What is happening with you when you're playing?
Yeah, it is spirit. What it is, the thing that you do, my concerts are 2.5 hours. So that's where I am, right there, 2.5 hours. You stay right there, then you stay open. And and you keep access to spirit, because that way what happens is you don't know what the audience is going through. And they're telling you what they want to receive from you when you're standing there on stage.
Well, that's my next question. So you're there, you're open, and you're channeling. Basically, you're
Right.
channeling something.
Right.
But there's a symbiotic relationship with the audience. I see you, people here, you start moving. You cannot help but move. So what is that like for you as the performer? You look out, walk us through what it's like. For you, it's a job, yes, but it's a passion. And you look out and there's people out there ready to receive. What is that?
Well, what I do generally, we have a sound check. I do sound checks every day because I like to rehearse. My sound checks are like 4 to 5, at rehearsals. And I always like to go out in the audience and take a look at the stage and the seats, because that'll tell me kind of like what it's going to feel like. Sort of like it'll give me a clue, what it'll feel like. And then once I go out there, then then we start to work on it. Actually with our show, we sort of like boxers. We go out fast and then slow it back down. We don't go out like this and go for 2 hours, because you can wear an audience out. You can exhaust an audience emotionally. So what you have to do, you have to pace that audience. So you can tell, in some audiences, the tempo is faster. Sometimes they want it here. Right. Sometimes they want it a little more laid back.
Right. And you sense that.
Yeah, you sort of sense that before what's going on. And don't forget, we live in a high information society. So depending on what's going on in the world, they're getting the same information that we're getting. If something happens in the world, if there's a stock market thing, or there's an emotional thing that go on, you can sort of feel from them that they've picked up on it. Like when, we did a concert when 9/11 happened. Every tour got canceled but ours. Every tour. And we played at the Universal Amphitheater at the time. It was one of the greatest concerts I had ever played.
People needed a release.
Yeah, and it was so emotional. They had flags up. It was like really, you could just feel it from the audience. So when I go out there, I try to access spirit. I try to stay open, and I try to just there's some of it's a script that we have to stay on point, and then we leave just enough room open for spontaneity,
right.
And then we bring it right back in.
I want to show some clips, but I want to ask this question before we show the clips. You're 65, but you are moving like you're 18 up there. How do you do that? Because we want some.
Well, I sort of treat this like an athlete. When I found out what it was, what I had, then I said, oh, this is what I have. So I'm going to protect it and work on it, Now, mind you, musicians, we get such a bad rap, for a lot of different reasons, for drugs, all that kind of stuff. But what I did, I made it a point to take the work seriously, steer away from that stuff, because I didn't want to be a musician like the rest of them. Yeah. I wanted to be like a sort of like, quasi-intellectual. I wanted to be that kind of guy.
It worked.
Yeah. And also, too, a lot of bands were put on top by record companies. A record company brought them there. We started ourselves, driving station wagons and vans, and so I saw it firsthand what it's like to start something from the very beginning to as big as it gets. And I didn't have to do any of that stuff, do drugs and overconsume, different things like that, and take me away from what I wanted to do, because this is what I always wanted to do. So I respected my tempo enough, and so I could stay in it and treat it like an athlete. And it put pressure on some of the other guys in the band to do the same, and pressure on some of my colleagues, now who are my age, Whereas before, they would joke me and they would, laugh and so now the ones that are my age, my colleagues from other bands say, listen, let me talk to you a second. What are you doing? I'm trying to stay around. So now they're asking me and they're, different things like that. And I'm not a vegan, I'm not a vegetarian.
Will you play for us a little bit?
A bass has 4 strings. A lot of the younger players have 5 strings. I can't play a 5. I don't have time to learn. I don't want to learn it. It's too much for me. And a lot of some of the songs were conceived on bass and guitar, and a lot of the bass lines on my records I created myself. Because once I got in the studio with Maurice, Maurice said, "Man, find your, play you, man." Play you. Who are you? Who are you? So he was, and I'm saying, who am I? You know what I mean? So I started figuring out different lines that I play, and one of our great songs is "Fantasy," right? Remember. That's the verse of Fantasy. So,
okay,
yeah.
but so everybody knows September. Play your, or Shining Star, or After the Love Is.
What song you say first? September?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Don't scare me like
that. I'm trying to figure it out. That's chorus. Right, I had to figure it out. Now, out of context, this kind of sounds weird. So it's an interesting instrument,
But when you're writing with your brother or you?
Yeah, depending on what it comes up with. Yeah, now generally the final bass part like this doesn't sound like it in the beginning. I'm making a lot of mistakes. I'm trying to figure out what it is. Depending on what the work is, and I like what you call a chord chart. A chord chart, is where I could see the chords, I know what the music is, and I prefer to listen to the music before I actually record, because with the final product is not really what it is while you're on the way, In our business, we have what you call outtakes. That's when the mistakes, there and then put them. As you see in movies, outtakes. If you could watch some of the great movies, and like Gone with the Wind, there are outtakes that you can't believe all the mistakes they made. But by the time you edit it, cut it up, put it together, it's perfect. And it's the same with what we do.
Okay, last question. So, first, why do you think? Wait, don't take it away, because I want you. So, Shining Star. Everyone all around the world loves Shining Star. What is it, do you think, about that song that's so universal?
The lyric, and it was what you call a hit chart.
What does that mean?
A chart that it wasn't on paper, and we recorded it in Colorado. And Maurice had this idea about this tune, what was it? And then shines up, your shine is the man. Shine stuff what you see, what you love.
So was he just noodling around in the studio?
He was noodling around and came up with the song, and that was our first big #1 record.
And did you know it when he pulled it out of the air?
I didn't know it, no.
Did he know?
Yeah. I think Maurice always knew. See, you understand, he was older, so he was there before we were there. In his, like when you saw the Kennedy Center honors, you know, that's a band. That's us now who are like really seasoned, and we're really, we're in there. But Maurice was there first before we were there. He was evolved. You know, like we did the Hollywood Bowl last year. We did 3 nights with the LA Philharmonic, you know. Great concert, great. But Philip and I couldn't have done that 20 years ago. We weren't mature enough. But Maurice could have.
So Maurice, his older brother, has Parkinson's.
Yes,
and can no longer.
Right, he's retired. And he retired he actually had it for like about 20 years. And it kind of kicked in a little worse maybe 3 years ago. But what happened was when he retired from the band, Philip and I had to make the decision to whether or not we could go on without Maurice, which was a big deal, a big deal not only for us but for the fans, because he had his own fan base without us. I mean, he's an icon. And so what happened was Philip and I had to not only be musicians, but we had to be businessmen. We had to run a business. So really what happened, when you saw the first parts of the clips, right, and what we were thinking, part of it is that we were young, so we could like bask in the glory of it, like, oh my God, we had a hit record, oh my God, we sold out, oh my God. Whereas now, when you're a businessman, you're checking box office, you're in meetings a lot, our business is on television, the music business is showed one way, but it's a very sophisticated business. And
but
so
you still love music.
Yes, but there's a different component because don't forget, like we're not really a band anymore as much as we are an entity.
Right.
I employ 50 people on a daily basis. We have staff meetings. I go over the touring schedule, rehearsal schedule. It's a lot to do. Philip and I are the CEOs of this big corporation we call.
The guy with the funny outfit is the CEO. I love that.
Yeah, we're the CEOs, and we have meetings and we have staff meetings. So when Maurice retired, we had to be business guys.
I want to thank you for your contribution.
Oh, thank you.
For decades and decades of music. We can we're going to take some questions.
Oh, cool. That's fun to do.
For how you changed so many people's lives. I mean, I cannot adequately say, and I'm sure other people will, the impact of the love of your music.